Far away in a quiet corner of the galaxy, the planet Sirel was trembling. Its skies were streaked with fire, cities lay in ruins, and a deep fear had settled over its people. For generations, the Sirel had lived in relative peace, thriving on their lush forests, sparkling oceans, and the harmony of their society. But everything changed when a ruthless enemy species, vast, merciless, and infinitely strong, arrived in their star system. The Sirel tried to fight back. Their armies, small but disciplined, defended the surface with courage, using whatever weapons they had. But the enemy was unlike anything they had ever faced. Massive warships blotted out the stars, weapons fired with deadly accuracy, and every attempt at resistance was crushed. Each day brought new losses. Entire cities vanished and millions of lives were lost. Families were torn apart. The screams of the wounded echoed in empty streets. The Sirel's hope began to fade, replaced by fear and despair. In the midst of this chaos, the leaders of Sirel realized something terrifying. They could not win on their own. Their technology was advanced, their strategy sound, but their enemy's strength was overwhelming. For the first time in their history, they felt completely powerless. As night fell on a ruined capital, the council gathered in a dimly lit chamber. The walls, once adorned with symbols of peace and unity, were scorched by fire and smoke. "We cannot survive this alone," one elder said, her voice trembling. "Our fleets are destroyed, our cities burned. If we do not act, our species will vanish." Another council member nodded, his face pale. "We must reach out beyond our stars. There has to be someone somewhere who can help us." For hours they debated. They considered sending scouts to neighboring systems, trying to form alliances with other civilizations. But time was running out. The enemy was relentless. Every moment spent hesitating meant more lives lost. Finally, they turned to an idea that had been whispered about for generations: sending a distress signal across the galaxy. This signal would not be like their usual communications. It had to reach a species that had the technology to cross the vast distances of space, one capable of intervening in a war that no one else could stop. They designed it carefully, encoding their message with information about their plight, their location, and the danger they faced. They included not just words, but images, maps, and data about their enemy's strength, hoping that whoever received it would understand the urgency. The Sirel gathered around the main transmitter, a massive device that hummed with energy. They activated the signal, sending it outward into the infinite darkness. The beam traveled light years through empty space, carrying their desperate plea. They did not know who, if anyone, would answer. They had heard tales of distant civilizations, of beings powerful enough to shape worlds, but these were stories, not reality. Now hope rested on a fragile thread. As the signal vanished into the void, the Sirel waited. Days turned into nights and nights into more days. Every ship that returned from scouting missions brought only grim news. The enemy continued its advance, destroying everything in its path. Fear grew into panic. People huddled in shelters, praying, crying, or simply staring blankly at the ruined cities around them. The council members met again and again, each time growing more desperate. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, something happened. Deep in the communication archives, a faint response flickered across their monitors. At first, it seemed like a technical glitch. Then the symbols began to form coherent patterns, messages that no Sirel had ever seen before. The language was strange, but the intent was clear. Someone or something had received their signal. The council could hardly believe it. Relief and hope surged through the room. The possibility of rescue, of survival, of fighting back against the enemy became tangible for the first time. Yet even in that moment of hope, there was fear. They did not know who had answered, what kind of help would come, or whether it would be enough to save them. As the days passed, the response became more precise. Instructions, questions, and acknowledgments arrived in forms they could decipher. Whoever was coming to help was powerful, much more so than the Sirel had ever imagined. The messages hinted at strength and technology beyond their comprehension. It was unlike any ally they had hoped for. This presence carried with it a sense of inevitability, of unstoppable force. The Sirel began to prepare for what they hoped would be the arrival of help. Ships that had been battered and burned were repaired as best as possible. Defenses were fortified and the wounded were moved to safer areas. But they also prepared for something else, something they had never truly expected. War on a scale far beyond their imagination. They did not know it yet, But the species responding to their call did not specialize in quiet rescue missions or cautious aid. Humanity, the ones who had intercepted their signal, were capable of absolute force, and when humanity decided to act, it would be without hesitation, without subtlety, and without mercy. In those final days before the arrival, the Sirel oscillated between fear and hope. Children played in the streets as best they could, unaware of the horrors that had passed. Adults worked tirelessly to strengthen whatever defenses they could, praying silently for the mysterious rescuers. And in the skies above, distant ships moved steadily toward their system, carrying a power that the Sirel could not yet understand. The Sirel did not know what awaited them, but for the first time in weeks there was a spark of something they had thought lost forever. Hope, a hope born not of chance or luck, but of a desperate signal sent across the void. A hope that someone somewhere had heard their cries for help, and that they would answer. Little did they know that humanity's response would not be subtle. It would not be careful. It would not simply aid. They would arrive with overwhelming power, a war fleet capable of turning the tide of the entire conflict in a single, decisive blow. And when they came, the galaxy would witness a force unlike anything it had ever seen, answering a plea for help with the full weight of human determination and absolute war. Until that moment, the Sirel waited, unaware of the true nature of their saviors, clinging to hope, and praying that the light at the edge of the galaxy was not a mirage but the beginning of their salvation. Far from Sirel, in the cold vastness of space, humanity's monitoring stations had intercepted the distress signal. At first, it seemed like another routine anomaly. Signals from unknown parts of the galaxy were not uncommon. But as the data poured in, it became clear that this was different. The signal was rich with information, detailed and desperate, and the message behind it was unmistakable. A species was fighting for its survival, and they were failing. Human scientists and engineers studied the signal, piecing together what it meant. They analyzed the language, the symbols, the star charts, and the encoded descriptions of the attackers. What they found was shocking. This civilization was facing a force far beyond their capacity to defend themselves. It was a problem that required intervention on a scale humanity had never attempted before. The leaders of humanity gathered in a vast command center orbiting Earth. The room was alive with activity. Screens showed the distant star system, schematics of alien ships, and simulations of potential outcomes. Generals, scientists, and diplomats debated what to do. Some argued for caution. "We cannot risk our fleets on a foreign war," one diplomat said. "We do not know these species, their technology, or their intentions. We could make the situation worse." Others argued for immediate action. "This is not just a request for help. It is a call for survival," a fleet commander replied firmly. "We have the means to intervene. We have the weapons, the ships, the strategy. If we wait, billions will die. Humanity cannot stand by while a species faces annihilation." After hours of discussion, the decision was made. Humanity would respond. But they would not respond with a simple aid mission. They would arrive prepared for total war. It was the only way to guarantee the survival of the Sirel. Plans were drawn, fleets were assembled, and ships were loaded with everything humanity had. Warships, fighter craft, energy weapons, and advanced defensive systems. As the Armada prepared for departure, the engineers ran final checks and the soldiers went through rigorous briefings. Everyone understood the gravity of the mission. This was not a drill. Lives, alien lives, depended on their actions. There was also a growing sense of pride among the crews. They were not just fighting for humanity. They were stepping into a role that no other species had dared to assume. Protectors of a distant civilization against overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, on Sirel, the aliens continued to wait, unaware of the preparations happening light years away. Their hope had grown fragile, tempered by weeks of despair. They did not know who had received their signal, what kind of help might arrive, or when it might reach them. Still, every faint blip on their sensors, every anomaly in space, filled them with anxious anticipation. Back in human space, the Armada began its journey. Ships of incredible size and power moved in perfect formation, cutting through the darkness of the void. The engines of the largest battleships glowed with immense energy, lighting up the surrounding emptiness with a pale, blue-white light. The smaller fighter craft darted between the larger vessels, agile and precise, ready to strike at a moment's notice. As the fleet traveled, Mission specialists reviewed intelligence about the enemy. They studied tactics, predicted responses, and ran countless simulations. Every possible scenario was considered. Humanity's approach was meticulous. Every move would be calculated, every strike coordinated. Failure was not an option. During the voyage, some crew members took time to observe the stars. They marveled at the beauty of space, the distant suns, and the planets spinning silently in the void. It was a moment of calm amid preparations for chaos. They thought about the species they were about to help, imagining the faces of beings who had never seen humans but were counting on them. There was empathy in the fleet, a human understanding that extended far beyond their own world. As the Armada approached the Cyril system, sensors detected the enemy's presence. Massive ships, heavily armed and strategically positioned, orbited the alien homeworld. Humanity's fleet moved with precision, keeping formation, readying weapons, and coordinating attacks. The commanders knew that speed and efficiency were critical. The longer they delayed, the more the enemy would gain an advantage. On the surface of Cyril, citizens felt a sudden shift. Sensors picked up unfamiliar signatures in orbit, ships larger and more powerful than anything the Cyril had ever seen. The sight was breathtaking. For the first time in weeks, there was awe mixed with fear. These were not aid ships. They were instruments of war. Humanity had come, and their arrival was undeniable. The first communications began. Messages were sent to the Cyril in their own language, carefully translated from the data humans had intercepted. The aliens were warned to stand down in certain areas, to avoid engagement in specific sectors, and to prepare for the intervention. The Cyril were both amazed and terrified. These beings from another star were willing to fight their enemy, but the scale and force of their presence left them unprepared for the reality of what was coming. Human commanders reviewed the plan one final time. The attack would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. They would neutralize enemy forces in orbit first, then secure the planet's surface if necessary. The strategy relied on speed, coordination, and technological superiority. There was no room for hesitation. Humanity had committed fully to this mission. As the alien defenders watched, strange shapes appeared in the sky. Massive ships, sleek and glowing with energy, moving in formation with terrifying efficiency. The enemy, sensing the threat, attempted to respond. But the human fleet was already in position, ready to strike at a scale the galaxy had never seen before. The Cyril could only watch as the prelude to battle unfolded above them. Their hope, fragile but real, grew stronger with each passing moment. Humanity had heard their call. Humanity had come. And although the Cyril did not yet understand the nature of the help they were receiving, they felt certain that survival was now within reach. Inside the human fleet, crews moved with quiet determination. Pilots prepared their fighters, engineers monitored energy flows, and commanders issued orders with calm authority. There was no panic, no hesitation, only focus. Every action was measured, precise, and designed to achieve maximum impact with minimal waste. The mission was not just to win, it was to ensure that no more innocent lives would be lost. And then, as the first sensors confirmed the enemy's positions, the final countdown began. Humanity was about to intervene in a war far from Earth, bringing with them not just aid but the full power of their military might. The Cyril, still waiting below, could only imagine what was coming, and hope that the legends of human strength were true. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The call for help had been heard. Humanity had answered, and the response would not be measured or cautious, it would be absolute. A demonstration of force that would change the course of the conflict forever. For the Cyril, the terror of weeks of fighting was beginning to fade, replaced by awe, relief, and a cautious optimism. They did not yet know the full scope of what humanity could do, but they sensed that the arrival of this new force marked a turning point. Their prayers, long unanswered, were finally being answered, not with subtle aid, but with the unstoppable might of a civilization that refused to let them fall. And somewhere deep within the human fleet, a quiet determination spread through every bridge, every control room, every soldier. They were not here just to observe, to offer words of comfort, or to provide minimal support. They were here to win, to protect, to ensure that the cries for help, sent across light years of empty space, would not go unanswered. Humanity had come. Humanity would act, and the galaxy would soon see the full measure of their resolve. The moment humanity's fleet entered Cyrell space, the system seemed to hold its breath. Stars glittered coldly in the distance, but the Cyril homeworld below seemed smaller, fragile, almost trembling under the shadow of the massive ships now in orbit. These were not ordinary vessels. They were enormous, bristling with weapons, glowing faintly from the energy cores that powered them, and moving with a precision that made the Cyrell's most advanced technology look rudimentary. From the bridges of these ships, human commanders scanned the enemy forces already patrolling the system. The enemy fleet was formidable, but disorganized and unaware of the scale of the arrival they were about to face. Human sensors picked up every detail: shield strengths, weapon placements, ship formations, and even predicted maneuvers based on previous attack patterns. Every calculation was precise, every strategy refined over decades of experience and preparation. On the surface, the Cyrell citizens were beginning to notice the enormous ships appearing in orbit. Families peeked from shelters, their eyes wide with awe. The sight was unlike anything they had ever imagined. Vessels larger than their cities, glowing like small suns, moving in perfect formation across the night sky. Fear mixed with wonder as they realized help had finally arrived. Messages from the human fleet reached the Cyrell leaders, translated into their language. The humans did not speak in cautious terms. Their tone was firm, commanding yet protective. They instructed the Cyrell to secure civilians in safe zones, to avoid conflict zones, and to prepare for the imminent engagement. For the Cyrell, it was a strange combination of reassurance and terror. They could see the ships, but they could not yet comprehend the full scale of their power. The human fleet began to deploy smaller fighter craft into the system, fast and agile, ready to engage any enemy vessels. These were accompanied by drones and surveillance ships that moved like swarms, scanning every corner of the battlefield. The sight was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic to the Cyrell observers. This was not a subtle operation. It was a demonstration of precision, coordination, and absolute dominance. Meanwhile, the enemy species, sensing the unusual energy signatures, scrambled their own forces. Massive warships shifted position. Weapons powered up and communication channels buzzed with alarm. But they were too late. Humanity had already calculated the best approach, predicting their every move. Every maneuver the enemy attempted was countered before it could even be executed. From the perspective of the human crews, the engagement was already underway, even before a single shot was fired. Pilots checked weapon systems, engineers monitored energy flows, and commanders issued final orders. There was no hesitation, no panic. Every human knew the stakes. Billions of lives depended on their success, and they would not fail. On the surface of Cyrell, citizens huddled together, watching the skies fill with unfamiliar shapes. Children pointed in wonder, elders whispered prayers, and warriors prepared themselves for what might come. Though they had begged for help, they could not fully understand what was approaching. The humans were not like any ally they had imagined. They were not here for negotiation or observation. They were here to fight. As the human fleet closed in on the enemy, the first signals of engagement appeared. Laser fire streaked across space. Energy shields flared and explosions illuminated the darkness. Human fighters darted in and out of formation, striking with surgical precision. Enemy ships were disabled, their systems overloaded before they could respond effectively. The scale and efficiency of the attack were overwhelming, even to the Cyrell who had witnessed countless battles. The human fleet moved as a single organism, each ship responding to the other without hesitation. There was no chaos, no miscommunication, only perfect coordination. This was the result of decades of planning, training, and experience. Every move was designed not just to win, but to ensure minimal collateral damage to the planet below and to protect the lives of the Cyrell. In the command centers of the human fleet, crews monitored every aspect of the battle. Data flowed in from sensors, drones, and surveillance satellites. Decisions were made in seconds and actions executed immediately. The humans had adapted to interstellar combat, and their response was both brutal and precise. Every attack weakened the enemy, and every move ensured that the Cyrell would survive. On the ground, the Cyrell saw strange lights in the sky, distant yet unmistakably powerful. The sound of distant explosions resonated even through the thin atmosphere, and the ground shook with the force of orbital bombardments. For many it was terrifying. For others it was hope in its most tangible form. The humans had come. They were here to fight, and they were winning. The enemy, realizing their disadvantage, attempted to retreat and regroup. But the human fleet anticipated this. Interceptors cut off escape routes, energy nets disabled propulsion systems, and precision strikes neutralized command centers. There was no chaos in the human response, only absolute control. The battle unfolded like a choreographed dance, with every step leading closer to victory. For the Cyro leaders, the scenes unfolding in orbit were both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They had begged for help, expecting perhaps supplies, defensive weapons, or reinforcements. What they received instead was overwhelming force, a demonstration of military power beyond anything they could have imagined. Yet despite the fear, there was a growing sense of relief. Humanity was not here to negotiate or to hesitate. They were here to end the threat, completely and decisively. As the battle raged, the human fleet continued to move with unwavering focus. Their strategy involved neutralizing threats quickly, minimizing the risk to the planet, and ensuring that the enemy could not regroup. Each strike was calculated, each maneuver precise. The Cyril watched, unable to fully comprehend the speed, coordination, and scale of the engagement. It was unlike any defense they had ever seen, and it was all directed at saving their species. On the ships themselves, humans worked tirelessly. Pilots pushed their machines to the limit. Engineers maintained power systems under extreme strain, and commanders coordinated attacks across thousands of kilometers of space. There was fatigue, but no hesitation. Everyone knew that the lives of countless beings depended on their success, and then slowly the tide began to turn. Enemy ships were disabled one by one, their formations broken, their weapons destroyed. Humanity's overwhelming force left little room for resistance. The Cyril could see the shift in the battle, hope growing stronger, fear diminishing, and the possibility of survival becoming real for the first time in weeks. By the time the first wave of engagement ended, the enemy had been decisively weakened. Human forces held control of the system, and the Cyril homeworld was safe, at least for now. Yet the humans did not stop. They continued to patrol, to scan for hidden threats, and to secure strategic positions in orbit. Their presence was a guarantee. The Cyril would not face this enemy alone again. For the Cyril, the arrival of humanity was nothing short of miraculous. They had begged for help, and what they received was beyond anything they could have imagined. These beings had come not just to assist, but to dominate the battlefield, to protect without compromise, and to ensure that survival was not a question, but a certainty. As the human fleet maintained its orbit and prepared for the next phase of operations, the Cyril began to understand something fundamental about their saviors. Humanity did not act in halves. They did not hesitate. They did not measure kindness in small doses. When they answered a call for help, they committed fully with overwhelming power and unwavering resolve. For the first time in weeks, the Cyril dared to hope. They saw the humans not just as warriors, but as protectors capable of bending the forces of the galaxy in their favor. And as they looked up at the stars filled with the lights of the approaching fleet, they realized that their prayers had been answered in a way they could barely comprehend. The battle had only begun, and yet humanity had already made its mark. The Cyril homeworld was no longer under immediate threat, and the enemy had been humbled. From orbit to the surface, it was clear. When humans intervened, they did not simply assist, they arrived with absolute force, reshaping the battlefield, protecting the helpless, and delivering hope to a species on the brink of extinction. And so as night fell across Cyril, its people watched the glowing silhouettes of human ships above. For the first time in a long time, they felt safe. The humans had come. They had seen the distress of a distant civilization, and they had answered, not with hesitation, not with words, but with overwhelming action. Humanity had arrived, and the Cyril would never forget the sheer power and determination they brought with them. The battle for Cyril had reached a tipping point. Humanity's fleet, already positioned in orbit with unmatched precision, was ready to unleash its full might. From the surface, the Cyril watched, both terrified and awed, as ships the size of mountains hovered above their cities, glowing with power that seemed almost supernatural. They had begged for help, and now they were about to witness it in a way they could never have imagined. On the bridges of the largest human battleships, commanders issued final orders. Every weapon system was online. Fighters and drones were deployed in tight formations, ready to strike. The energy shields around the ships pulsed with power, a protective bubble capable of withstanding the fiercest attacks. Humanity had not come merely to assist, they had come to end the threat entirely. The enemy, sensing the full presence of the human fleet, scrambled desperately. Massive warships tried to maneuver into defensive positions, while smaller ships attempted to intercept human fighters. But it was already too late. The humans had anticipated every move, predicting the enemy's strategy with astonishing accuracy. Every path of retreat was cut off, every formation disrupted. Then the first strike came. Human fighter craft darted through space, weaving between enemy vessels like swarms of silver lightning. They fired precision energy beams, disabling propulsion systems, knocking out communication arrays and neutralizing weapons before the enemy could react. Massive explosions lit up the darkness of space, echoing across the void in silent flashes of destruction. The Cyrell watched in disbelief. Ships that had once seemed unstoppable were being dismantled almost effortlessly. Humanity did not hesitate. They did not negotiate or pause to gauge the enemy's strength. Every attack was calculated, precise, and devastating. It was a display of sheer efficiency and overwhelming force. Below the battlefield, Cyrell citizens huddled in shelters and observation areas. They had hoped for rescue, yes, but nothing had prepared them for this. The humans were not just protecting them, they were dominating the fight entirely. Fear mixed with relief, and for the first time in weeks, the Cyrell felt that survival was possible. On the battlefield, the humans coordinated attacks with incredible timing. Battleships fired long-range energy cannons, striking enemy vessels before they could respond. Interceptor drones moved in perfect synchronization, disabling enemy shields and targeting weak points. It was as if the entire fleet were one organism, each part moving in perfect harmony with the others. The enemy tried to counterattack, firing volleys of plasma and missiles. But human ships absorbed the impact with shields that shimmered like a second layer of skin, then responded with retaliatory strikes that shattered enemy formations. Every move was anticipated, every action countered before it could fully manifest. The Cyrell watched with a mixture of awe and fear, realizing that the humans were not just powerful, they were unstoppable. As the battle continued, human commanders remained calm, their focus unbroken. Pilots executed maneuvers with incredible skill, dodging enemy fire while delivering precise attacks. Engineers monitored energy levels, rerouting power to weapons and shields as needed. Every person aboard every ship understood their role, their responsibility, and the lives that depended on them. In the midst of the chaos, humanity's strategy became clear. They were not simply destroying the enemy. They were dismantling their entire system of attack. Command centers were targeted and obliterated, supply ships destroyed, and fleet communications cut. The enemy's ability to organize resistance crumbled under the relentless precision of human assault. On the ground, the Cyrell could see strange lights streaking across the sky, explosions rippling through orbit, and ships moving with a speed and coordination that defied their understanding. Children clung to their parents, elders whispered prayers, but everyone felt a growing sense of hope. Humanity had promised help, and they were delivering it in ways the Cyrell could never have imagined. The first phase of the assault lasted for hours. Enemy fleets were decimated, their defensive strategies nullified. Humanity's forces moved in waves, overwhelming every attempt at resistance. For the Cyrell, it was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Their saviors were not cautious. They were absolute, decisive, and relentless. Every action was calculated to protect, to eliminate threats, and to ensure survival. During the battle, communication between human ships and the Cyrell intensified. Humans offered instructions for minimizing risk on the planet below, guiding citizens away from danger zones and identifying safe shelters. Even in the midst of war, their focus remained on protecting lives. The Cyrell realized that these humans were not just fighters, they were guardians, willing to wield unimaginable power to save a species they had never met. As the hours passed, the enemy's resistance weakened further. Massive vessels exploded into fragments, smaller ships were disabled and abandoned, and orbital defenses around Cyril's cities fell one by one. Humanity's strategy was not chaotic destruction. It was a precise, methodical campaign to eliminate threats while ensuring the planet itself remained intact. By late orbit cycles, the first major phase of the assault concluded. The enemy fleet had been shattered, their systems crippled, and their forces scattered. Human ships held control of strategic points around the Cyril homeworld, ready to respond to any remaining threats. The planet below, once trembling under constant attack, was now calm, its citizens safe for the first time in weeks. For the Cyril, the relief was overwhelming. They had begged for help, expecting perhaps supplies, reinforcements, or minor defensive aid. Instead, they had witnessed the full might of humanity unleashed, a power so immense and precise that it had turned the tide of war in a single decisive campaign. The humans had answered their plea not with hesitation, but with total, unrelenting force. Inside the human fleet, crews took a moment to assess the battlefield. They monitored the remnants of enemy forces, ensured that civilian areas remained secure, and prepared for the next steps. Even in victory, there was no celebration. Only focus, discipline, and the knowledge that their mission was far from complete. They had saved lives, yes, but the fight for total security continued. On the Cyril homeworld, leaders began to organize recovery efforts. Citizens emerged cautiously from shelters, taking stock of the destruction around them. There was fear, yes, but it was overshadowed by hope. Humanity had shown them a new reality. Survival was possible, protection was guaranteed, and they were not alone. The humans above had brought not just weapons, but certainty, security, and the promise of life continued. The Cyril children stared at the skies, wide-eyed, pointing to the massive ships hovering above. For them, humanity had become more than a distant legend. They were saviors, protectors who had arrived when all seemed lost. Elders whispered tales of the battle, knowing that the story of humanity's arrival would be told for generations. And yet, even in this moment of relief, the humans remained vigilant. Sensors continued to scan the system for any hidden threats, fighters patrolled orbital paths, and command centers coordinated the next phase of security operations. Humanity's intervention was not temporary, it was absolute. They had come to ensure that the Cyril species would not face extinction, and they would do so with unwavering dedication. As night fell across the planet, the Cyril looked up at the glowing human fleet and felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and cautious optimism. They had asked for help, and the answer had been delivered in a way they could barely comprehend. Humanity had not only defended them, they had dominated, dismantled, and neutralized the enemy. Survival was now a reality, and it had come at the hands of beings whose strength, precision, and determination surpassed anything the Cyril had imagined. In the following hours, humans continued to secure the system. Enemy survivors were rounded up or disabled, key positions reinforced, and planetary defenses monitored. There was no relaxation, no complacency. The mission was to protect, and protection required vigilance. For the Cyril, it was clear, humanity did not act halfway. When they committed, it was total, absolute, and irreversible. By the time the first night passed, the battle for Cyril had reached a turning point. Humanity had proven their capability, their strategy, and their will. The enemy was no longer a threat capable of destroying the planet. The Cyril could begin to rebuild, to heal, and to hope for the first time in decades. And all of it had been delivered by humans, a species from a distant world who had answered a desperate call with something far beyond expectation: absolute war. The Cyril knew that this day would be remembered forever. The humans had shown them that when help arrives, it does not come in half measures or cautious gestures. It comes with total force, unshakable resolve, and a promise that those who are innocent will be protected at all costs. The Cyril had begged for help, and humanity had answered, not with hesitation but with the full weight of their power. And somewhere in the dark expanse of space, the human fleet prepared for the next steps, ever watchful, ever ready. Their mission was clear: protect, secure, and ensure that no threat would ever return to endanger the Sorel again. Their arrival had not been subtle. It had not been small. It had been absolute. And for the Sorel, it was nothing short of miraculous. The smoke from the battles in orbit was still fresh, and the Cyril homeworld began to exhale a collective breath it had not drawn in weeks. Humanity's fleet held a firm grip over the system, and the enemy, once confident and menacing, had been reduced to scattered remnants struggling to hide. The people of Cyril emerged cautiously from shelters, their eyes scanning the skies for the faintest sign of danger. The fear that had dominated their lives for weeks was slowly being replaced by a tentative hope. Human commanders did not immediately rest. They knew that victory in a single battle did not guarantee total security. The enemy had scattered across the system, hiding among asteroids, distant moons, and orbital debris. Any resurgence could threaten the planet once again. So humanity deployed patrols, fighters, drones, and surveillance craft, moving systematically across every corner of the Cyril system. Each movement was precise, each decision measured to ensure that no threat could re-emerge unnoticed. On the ground, the Cyril leaders worked tirelessly to restore order. They organized teams to rescue civilians from the rubble, repair damaged infrastructure, and ensure the wounded received care. Every street that had been devastated by enemy attacks was being cleared, rebuilt, and restored. Though there was still fear in the hearts of the people, they could feel the reassuring presence of their human protectors above. The skies once filled with chaos now carried the steady, imposing shapes of massive warships that would not allow any harm to come near their world. Human soldiers and engineers worked closely with the Cyril, teaching them how to recognize remaining threats and avoid danger zones. The humans explained how enemy technology worked, how to anticipate attacks, and how to defend themselves if necessary. They did not just provide protection, they shared knowledge, empowering the Cyril to take an active role in securing their own world. Despite the destruction, the resilience of the Cyril people shone brightly. Families reunited, children laughed again, and communities began to rebuild. Gardens were replanted, schools reopened, and marketplaces slowly returned to life. Humanity's intervention had not just saved lives, it had allowed hope to flourish in the hearts of an entire civilization. Yet even as recovery began, the human fleet remained vigilant. Scouts continued to track enemy remnants, fighters patrolled orbital routes, and massive warships maintained a constant presence. Humanity's aim was not simply to protect the Cyril temporarily. It was to ensure that the enemy could never return to threaten them again. Every remaining enemy vessel was either captured, disabled, or monitored closely. There was no room for error. For the Cyril, watching the humans work was a revelation. Their saviors did not pause after initial victory. They continued to plan, to protect, and to ensure long-term safety. The humans were not motivated by glory or recognition. They were motivated by a singular, unwavering purpose: to prevent extinction, to protect life, and to ensure that the innocent would not be left vulnerable. As days passed, humanity began to assist in rebuilding strategic installations that had been destroyed during the conflict. Communications arrays, defense systems, and power grids were reconstructed with precision and care. The Cyril were amazed by the efficiency, skill, and speed with which the humans worked. What might have taken their species years to accomplish was completed in a matter of days, a testament to the technology, discipline, and determination of their protectors. The humans also worked to establish permanent monitoring stations around the Cyril system. These stations were equipped with advanced sensors capable of detecting threats from light years away. The Cyril were given access to these systems, allowing them to feel more secure while learning to interpret the data. Humanity was building not just protection but understanding, ensuring that the Cyril could stand alongside them in safeguarding their world. During this period, the humans continued to neutralize scattered enemy forces. They found small pockets of resistance on distant moons and in asteroid fields. Swift strikes were carried out with precision, eliminating threats without unnecessary collateral damage. It was not reckless destruction. It was meticulous, controlled, and decisive action that ensured safety without endangering the planet or its people. The Cyril people, observing all of this, began to understand a critical truth about their saviors. Humans did not act partially. They did not provide aid in small, uncertain doses. When they intervened, they committed completely. Their actions were absolute, overwhelming, and uncompromising, but always guided by a principle of protection. Humanity had arrived not just to fight, but to guarantee survival. On the surface, life gradually began to normalize. Markets reopened, children returned to schools, and citizens repaired their homes with assistance from both human engineers and their fellow Cyril. The presence of the humans in orbit continued to serve as a reminder that protection was guaranteed. For the first time in generations, the Cyril felt safe not just in the moment but for the long term. Yet even in peace, humanity remained watchful. Patrols continued, sensors remained active, and warships maintained readiness for any possible threat. The humans understood that security required constant vigilance. They were not here to celebrate victory. They were here to ensure it endured. The Cyril began to build trust in their saviors. Where fear had once dominated, a sense of security and admiration now grew. The humans had entered their world at a moment of crisis and had acted without hesitation, without compromise, and without delay. They had seen the Cyril's desperation and responded with absolute power, ensuring survival against all odds. In quiet moments, some Cyril citizens would gaze up at the human ships in orbit, marveling at their size, their strength, and the silent authority they carried. It was not only fear or awe, it was gratitude, deep and profound, for a species that had answered a call for help across the vast emptiness of space and had done so with complete commitment. Human commanders held regular meetings to assess the ongoing security of the system. They reviewed the status of enemy remnants, monitored repair progress on the planet, and ensured that the Cyril's recovery continued smoothly. Every decision was made with care, every action considered in the context of long-term safety. The humans had proven that they could project power, but they also proved that they could exercise control and responsibility. Meanwhile, the Cyril themselves began to adapt. With human guidance, they learned new defensive strategies, monitored sensors, and understood their own system in ways they had never imagined. The humans were not just saviors, they were teachers, mentors, and partners in survival. A partnership was forming, one built on trust, respect, and a shared understanding of the stakes. Over weeks, the enemy threat diminished entirely. Scattered forces were captured or neutralized, leaving no significant capacity to challenge the Cyril homeworld again. Humanity's presence ensured that any future threat would be immediately detected and addressed. The planet could breathe, rebuild, and thrive, knowing that powerful guardians watched over them. As the recovery progressed, the Cyril reflected on what had happened. They had sent a desperate signal, pleading for help from beings they had never met. The response they received was beyond anything they could have imagined. Humanity had not arrived with hesitation, doubt, or minimal intervention. They had arrived with full force, absolute power, and unwavering determination to ensure survival. For the Cyril, the events of these weeks would be remembered for generations. The humans had brought more than weapons. They had brought life, hope, and the certainty that they were not alone in the galaxy. Humanity's actions had rewritten what it meant to be protected, what it meant to be saved. They had demonstrated that when help is truly needed, it can come with force, decisiveness, and the full measure of commitment. Even as humans began to reduce active operations, they maintained a significant presence. Warships patrolled, surveillance systems operated constantly, and human engineers continued to assist with rebuilding and system management. It was not occupation, it was guardianship, a constant reassurance that the Cyril could now look to the future with confidence. For the first time in generations, the Cyril felt free from the terror that had once consumed them. Their skies, once dominated by fear and destruction, were now filled with the lights of those who had come to protect them. Humanity had arrived, and the world would never be the same. They had begged for help, and humanity had answered, not partially, not hesitantly, but fully, decisively, and absolutely. And in doing so, they had created a bond of trust, respect, and hope that would endure long after the battle was over. The Cyril homeworld was finally quiet. For the first time in many cycles, the skies above were no longer filled with the chaos of battle, nor the distant fires of exploding ships. Humanity's fleet remained in orbit, but their presence now carried a different weight. Not the fearsome dominance of war, but the calm assurance of guardianship. The people of Cyril began to emerge fully from shelters, stepping into a world that had been shattered but was slowly healing. Human commanders continued to coordinate with Cyrell leaders, establishing a long-term plan for protection, rebuilding, and training. The humans understood that saving a species did not end with the elimination of immediate threats. True survival required knowledge, preparation, and the ability to withstand challenges in the future. So alongside repairing cities, they shared strategies for planetary defense, helped establish early warning systems, and trained Cyrell in tactics for avoiding potential ambushes from space. The Cyrell watched with awe. They had called out into the galaxy in their desperation, never expecting a response like this. They had hoped for aid, maybe some weapons or reinforcements, but instead they received the full force of a civilization willing to bring absolute war to protect them. Now humanity's presence was teaching them to stand stronger than ever before. In the weeks that followed, Cyrell communities began to thrive again. Markets reopened, schools filled with children's laughter, and families rebuilt their homes. Gardens and farms were replanted, and slowly green spaces returned to the planet, erasing the scars of destruction. Each day brought new hope, a proof that survival was not just a fleeting chance but a lasting reality. Human engineers and technicians worked alongside the Cyrell, fixing damaged infrastructure and sharing technology far beyond anything the Cyrell had known. Communication networks that had been destroyed in the conflict were restored and enhanced, providing a secure way for the Cyrell to stay connected both on their planet and throughout the system. Power grids, water systems, and transportation routes were repaired with efficiency and precision. Every effort was made not only to rebuild what had been lost but to make the planet stronger than before. Meanwhile, patrols in orbit continued. The humans did not leave the system unmonitored, knowing that remnants of the enemy could attempt to regroup. Interceptor drones scoured asteroid belts, moons, and distant regions of space, searching for any sign of hostile activity. Every threat was neutralized quickly, decisively, and with minimal risk to the planet below. Humanity's presence was absolute, a shield that could not be penetrated. The Cyrell began to understand the full extent of what had been done for them. Humanity had not simply intervened to prevent their immediate destruction. They had brought overwhelming power, strategy, and unwavering determination to ensure that the species could continue to exist safely. The humans had shown them what true protection looked like. It was not temporary, not cautious, not measured. It was absolute. In addition to security and rebuilding, humans assisted in cultural restoration. Important historical sites, monuments, and records were carefully repaired. The Cyrell were taught techniques to protect their heritage from future threats. Humanity understood that survival was more than biological. It was the preservation of identity, memory, and civilization itself. The bond between the humans and the Cyrell grew stronger each day. Human crews walked among the people, teaching, helping, and sharing knowledge. The Cyrell, once terrified and desperate, began to trust not only the ships above but the beings inside them. Humans were no longer an unknown force. They were teachers, guardians, and allies. Even with the immediate danger gone, humanity maintained an unwavering presence in the system. Patrols, monitoring stations, and orbital defense grids ensured that the Cyrell would never again be vulnerable to surprise attack. The humans had made one thing clear. When they answer a call for help, they do not do so half-heartedly. They commit fully, with total force and absolute resolve. The Cyrell began to rebuild not just their cities, but their sense of confidence and identity. Children who had hidden in fear now played openly in safe zones, guided by humans who monitored from above. Adults returned to work, learning new techniques and strategies from human teachers. Communities organized themselves more efficiently, incorporating lessons learned from both their own history and the guidance of their protectors. Across the planet, the feeling of hope and renewal spread. Markets and trade resumed, cultural events began again, and festivals returned to the streets, celebrating life and resilience. Humanity's intervention had done more than save lives. It had given a civilization the chance to flourish again. The Cyrell understood that they owed their continued existence to the decisive action of a species from across the stars. For the human commanders, their work was not complete but had shifted from immediate warfare to long-term guardianship. They conducted regular drills with the Cyrell, trained scouts to recognize potential threats, and monitored the system with advanced sensors capable of detecting dangers light years away. Humanity's philosophy was clear. Protection meant constant vigilance, preparation, and readiness for any challenge that might arise. The Sorel began to grasp the lessons humanity had brought with them. That survival requires both courage and strategy, that hope is a force that grows when paired with action, and that even the smallest species can be saved when help arrives with absolute commitment. The people marveled at the humans' discipline, their strength, and their dedication. These were beings who could have fought from a distance or sent only partial aid. Instead, they had brought everything they had, leaving nothing to chance. As months passed, the planet stabilized. Trade routes were reopened, diplomatic relations with nearby star systems were re-established, and the population slowly returned to pre-war levels. The humans remained vigilant, yet their presence was no longer seen as purely martial. They had become a permanent symbol of security and trust. Their massive ships in orbit were no longer only instruments of war. They were guardians, keeping the peace and ensuring the Cyril's survival for generations to come. On the ground, stories spread of humanity's arrival. Children grew up hearing tales of how a distant species had crossed the void of space to save them, not with hesitation but with overwhelming, absolute action. Artists painted murals of human ships in the skies, while historians recorded the details of the battles and the rebuilding efforts. Humanity's intervention became a part of the planet's culture and memory, a symbol of hope and protection that would endure for centuries. The Cyril learned to work alongside their saviors. Humans taught them new technologies, strategies for defense, and methods for maintaining order in the face of potential threats. The aliens had once relied solely on their own capabilities, but now they had an example of what could be achieved with skill, determination, and collaboration. Humanity had not just saved a species, they had shown them a new way to survive and thrive. Even as the Cyril adapted and rebuilt, humanity's presence reminded them that they were never truly alone. The fleet remained in orbit, constantly monitoring, ready to respond to any threat. The humans had made one thing clear: when a species calls for help in desperation, the response is not measured or cautious. It is complete, decisive, and absolute. Years passed, and the Cyril civilization prospered. With the guidance of humanity, they rebuilt stronger, smarter, and safer than ever before. Knowledge was shared, defenses improved, and culture thrived. The bond between the two species deepened into mutual respect and understanding. Humanity had not simply arrived to fight. They had arrived to ensure the Cyril could endure, flourish, and claim a future free from fear. The planet, once on the brink of destruction, now stood as a testament to what could happen when help arrives with unwavering commitment. The Cyril looked up at the stars, knowing that humanity had not only protected them, but had taught them the value of strength, vigilance, and the courage to survive. Their civilization would never forget the intervention that had saved them from annihilation. And so, as the Cyril continued to thrive, the humans maintained their presence not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as protectors. They had answered a call for help with absolute war, yes, but their legacy was something far greater: survival, renewal, and the unbreakable promise that when humanity responds to those in need, they do so completely, decisively, and without compromise. The Cyril had begged for help. Humanity had answered, and in doing so, they had changed the course of an entire civilization forever. A species that had once faced extinction now looked to the future with hope, confidence, and the knowledge that across the stars, allies existed who would act with absolute resolve to protect life and preserve survival.